bootleg and unlicensed games have always been the butt of the joke in retro gaming spaces, but there's actually a lot of good bootleg games that you most likely never even heard of. So here's a list for you to check out. So let's get started. This is Castlevania DX, a bootleg Castlevania game launched for the Game Boy Color by Syntax. Now, I don't know when this game came out, but I should point out that for years, there was a demo of this game floating around the internet, which is what most YouTube videos are using. But a couple of years ago, the full release was finally dumped, which is what I'm playing here. But despite not knowing when this game was launched, it's pretty obvious that it came out after the Game Boy Advance games, because your character design seems to be heavily influenced by Just Belmont and Soma Cruz. The game also reuses the soundtrack from Castlevania II Belmont's Revenge for the original Game Boy. So if you've ever played that game, you'll find this soundtrack very familiar. And while I can't confirm, I'm pretty sure that the game is also using the same engine as well. But what's more interesting is that this is not using the classic Castlevania formula. No! This is a full-blown Metroidvania for the Game Boy Color. Heck, it's probably the only Metroidvania game on the Game Boy Color, official or not. If you can think of any other Metroidvania-style games for the Game Boy or Game Boy Color, let me know in the comments, because I would love to check them out. And when I say that this is using the Metroidvania formula, I mean the full formula, complete with an auto map that updates as you visit new areas. As you play the game, you'll find icons that give you new abilities like a double jump or a slide maneuver, allowing you to reach new areas. And when you defeat enemies, you'll gain experience and level up, making you more resilient and making it easier to take out enemies. Not only that, but enemies will also drop money and items. Items can be anything from health and mana potions to gear that you can equip to improve your stats. And you'll also come across NPCs who sell you items and heal you up. And you'll even pick up the traditional sub-weapons like the cross, which are now equipable items from your inventory. This is a really ambitious game, and especially considering that this was done by bootleg developers who did not have access to official development kits. Now granted, some of your enemies are really out of place here. You'll be fighting Thornberries from Final Fantasy and even Donkey Kong for some reason. But most enemies do fit the Castlevania aesthetic. And the purpose of the game is that each major area has a key and a boss, and you'll have to find the key, which opens the door to the boss. And once you take him out, you'll get an item which I assume unlocks the final boss room. One thing I should point out though is that the difficulty in this game is really unbalanced. This game is super difficult at first, and it basically forces you to grind for experience and items, but it does become easier as you go on. And once you find the whip, the difficulty basically takes a huge nosedive, thanks to your increased range of attack. Now, in typical Syntax fashion, this game got many re-releases, where the sprites were changed to other IPs. So you have a Mega Man Zero version of this game and even a Dragon Quest one. But these usually come with hitbox issues and a few new bugs. So if you're going to play this, you should stick with the originally intended Castlevania version. So, should you play this game? Absolutely! This is one of my go-to bootlegs and one I like to return to every now and again. Check it out if you can. This is Magic Kid Googoo, a Korean unlicensed game launched for the NES, and this is a surprisingly good and original game. So it starts out as your typical platformer, and you can only take out enemies by picking up items and throwing them against them, a mechanic which was clearly inspired by Mario 2. And the goal of the game is to find the key which is hidden somewhere in the level and then reach the end. So far, so good. But now, here's where it gets interesting. You can pick up items and throw them against vases and they'll usually drop candy or pills. Or you can find them floating around the levels. And the idea is, as you get enough pills, you can pause the game where you'll access a menu. Here, you can spend pills to switch to different characters. These will usually have different speeds and jumping heights, but they'll also have their own attacks. So the knight, for example, is easy to control, but only has a short range attack. The penguin moves awkwardly on land, but is a great swimmer and can fire bubbles. The otter moves better than the penguin on land and has a better firing arc, but also costs more. Because yes, different characters will have different prices, so you'll often need to strategize on whether you want to save up and go for the cheaper ones or splurge on the better characters. Not only that, but this menu also has a sub-menu where you can activate items that you'll be picking up during gameplay. These can be screen-clearing bombs or an item that works like the superstar in Mario, giving you temporary invincibility and taking out all enemies you come in contact with. But wait, there's more! Because you'll also occasionally be brought to a game room where you can play one of 4 different minigames. Here, you need to bet on how much candy you want to spend, and then you can play a slot machine, a ladder game, or even a memory game. And if you do well enough, you'll get twice as many or even 3 times as many candies as you originally wagered. And after you finish the minigame, you're then taken to a shop where you can buy extra lives, pills to change into characters, or items for your inventory. Like, there's a lot of mechanics here, but they all coalesce into a really fun game and add a nice layer of strategy for what could have otherwise been a mindless platformer. Add to that some pretty decent level design and nice graphics, and you honestly have a really good NES game, official or not. So if you want to play a cool hidden gem for the NES that you most likely never heard of, then check out Magic Kid Googoo. You might just be surprised at what you find. This is Beggar Prince, an RPG made in Taiwan and launched unofficially on the Mega Drive or Sega Genesis. I actually have no idea if I should call this a JRPG or not, considering that it's using the traditional JRPG formula, but it's not made in Japan. What do you think? Does this count as a JRPG? Let me know in the comments. The game tells the story of the prince and the pauper, in that you're a spoiled prince in a fantasy land and you want to go out and have fun. So while sticking out, you run into your double and convince him to take your place. However, when you try to return to the castle, you're blocked, and it seems that the evil cat minister is now taking this as a chance to take over the kingdom. So now it's your job to get your kingdom back. To do this, you'll be talking to NPCs, taking on quests, and engaging in turn-based battles. What I find interesting is that this is basically a light JRPG. What I mean is, you don't actually have any money or shops to buy gear, but you will find gear while exploring the dungeons, which can increase your defense. You also don't get any party members, it's just you by your lonesome self, which you might think limits the combat, but it surprisingly doesn't. The game has a super interesting combat system that I've never really seen before. Basically, when you're in battle, each side has a number of action points, which is represented by this bar. So a normal attack only takes a few action points, but a powerful spell will consume over half of your action points. Not only that, but your action points are constantly going down, so you cannot take too much time in making a decision on your next move. But on the other hand, your enemies also have an action bar, which is shared between all foes, meaning that you'll be attacked the same number of times, regardless of whether you're fighting one enemy or 6. So the strategy in Beggar Prince becomes pretty unique. Basically, if you're fighting a party with different foes, you should focus on the enemies with the strongest attacks or the enemies that consume the most action points. And this works surprisingly well. Graphically, the game is alright. It kind of looks like an early Mega Drive game, despite having launched fairly late into the system's life. And the music is mostly pleasant, if nothing to write home about. I should point out though that this game has some emulation issues, especially on older emulators like Fusion, so you might want to download some more modern emulators. I've previously played Beggar Prince, and I think I was a little too harsh on it in the past. The presentation might be a little too simple for its own good, but the gameplay is solid, and I really enjoyed it. So I say, check it out if you can. This is Onimusha 2, a bootleg game release for the Game Boy Color by Syntax. Now, despite this being called Onimusha 2, I actually have no idea if it's following the game's plot or not, but I'm going to assume that it is. But then again, there isn't that much story here to speak of, but what we do have is in Chinese, so I have no way of reading it. Anyway, Onimusha 2 is an action platformer with some light RPG elements. You begin in an overworld where you go to whatever level you want to tackle next. Once you do that, the game becomes an action platformer. In this mode, you can attack and jump, and as you defeat enemies, they'll drop items that restore your health or permanently increase your attack. And you'll also level up, making you more resilient. And once you finish a level, you come out the other side of the overworld, where you can either progress to the next area or go to locales with NPCs. So for example, near the start of the game, you'll find this witch who was clearly taken from Shining Force 2. And after you're done speaking to her, you'll be given an item. Because yes, this game also has an inventory. And you access it during the action levels to equip stuff like healing items or new powers that the NPCs give you. So the witch, for example, gives you a high jump and a double jump that allows you to progress through stages you otherwise wouldn't be able to. And you'll also find items to pick up just by exploring the levels. And you can even return to previous levels if you want, because items will always respawn. And if this formula is starting to look familiar to you, then it's because this game was clearly inspired by Konami's Getsu Fuuma Den. Which is a game that a lot of Taiwan bootleg studios would often copy or be inspired by. I'm guessing it must have been a popular game over there. I quite enjoyed this game, but I feel the level design has one massive flaw, and that is that there are too many pits or leaps of faith that you can fall into if you're not careful due to the small screen of the Game Boy. I feel that this could have been easily avoided if the game did not give you the high jump so early. So it's very easy to abuse this mechanic and falling onto a pit because you weren't paying attention. Because of this, I recommend that you actually turn off that power during some levels. But overall, yeah, I quite enjoyed this game. It's a little flawed as Syntax games tend to be, but I still think it's worth checking out. This is Bucaneers for arcades, which is a total conversion of Irem's Vigilante, except now it takes place in a pirate setting. This is a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you have to punch and kick your way to the end of the stage. You have the same moves as the original game, though you now move a little slower. And the game does not let you pick up nunchucks like in the original, but it does let you use guns, which are way more fun if you ask me. Sadly though, the fact that your character moves a bit slower than Vigilante is a bit of a bummer, but on the other hand, Bucaneers improves over the original in a few ways. For one thing, like I said, you now get a gun, which is far more fun, and the music, while nothing to write home about, is far less egregious than the arcade original. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that, but Vigilante has some of the most unappealing music of its time. By comparison, this one isn't nearly as bad. The game would also get an Amstrad CPC port, but as far as I know, that version isn't unlicensed, nor is it using any assets without permission. So, I guess the pipeline from bootleg to official is real. Hi, this is Tika from the future. So, just as I was about to wrap up this video, I discovered that there's a sequel releasing on Steam literally the day that this video comes out, called Bucaneers Shipshape. Once again, the pipeline from bootleg to official is definitely real. But either way, this is still a fun variation on the game that, let's be honest here, hasn't aged all that well. But still, if you're into the original Vigilante, you might enjoy this one. This is Firehawk for the NES, a helicopter game developed by Codemasters and released unofficially in the US by Camerica. You're part of the US military, and a fictional country has asked for your help to stop some criminal enterprises. So you'll be going on a series of missions that require you to destroy enemy buildings and rescue hostages. So you'll be flying in a fairly open map for the NES, and you can follow the arrow in your pointer for your next objective. And if this is starting to sound like Desert Strike to you, then yeah, it's actually quite similar, though Firehawk plays like a more arcadey take. Though what's surprising is that this game actually predates Desert Strike by a full year. Along the way, you'll be fighting enemies and destroying buildings, and as you do this, they'll drop fuel, ammo, and weapon upgrades like a double shot and a triple shot. And if you're running out of fuel or ammo, you can always go back and dock with your ship to resupply. Once you find a hostage, you can initiate a rescue maneuver, which basically has you fending off enemies left and right, while you try to keep your helicopter from swerving too much to allow them to climb your ladder. I gotta say though, these bits were easily the hardest part of the game. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but this is where I lost the most health and the most lives. The objectives here are nowhere near the scope of Desert Strike. Basically, you only have to destroy enemy buildings, save hostages, and dock with your ship. And the cool thing is that if you get lost, you can simply hit the select button and the arrow on your cursor will either point to your next goal or back to the ship to resupply. My biggest issue with this game is the lack of music, which is honestly surprising. I mean, Codemasters games can be hit or miss, but one spot where they never miss is the music. So I'm not sure why they decided to go the immersive route and only give you sound effects. Definitely the wrong call to make. But regardless, this is still a great game, and I had a blast playing it. If you're in the mood for a more arcadey Desert Strike game, then this is the game for you. So I say, check it out if you can. This is 3D Hero, also known as Legends of Shuhan's Heroes, and this is a first-person shooter released for MS-DOS in Taiwan. And this game uses a heavily modified version of the DOOM engine without its software's permission. It might also be using bits and pieces of the build engine as well, because this studio would also release Mars 3D, which basically Frankenstein both engines into one. But while I can't confirm if that's what they did here, I'm pretty certain they did. And I say this because you can look up and down and even jump, which is the sort of thing you'd expect from the Duke Nukem 3D engine. Anyway, this game is basically a mix of a classic first-person shooter like Doom or Duke Nukem 3D with Dynasty Warriors, and it's also played in third person. There is a button to switch to first-person mode though, but I didn't find that out until much later. You choose between various characters which have different stats, weapons, and magic, and the idea here is that your combat is supposed to be done in melee. Well, there is one character who has a ranged weapon, but he kinda sucks. And if at any time you need more firepower, you can switch between the various spells and use them, though using them will cost mana, which you recover by picking up items. Not only that, but items aren't used automatically. Rather, they get stored in an inventory which you can access at any time. Which, again, sounds like something from the build engine. So, some characters are great at combat but have hardly any mana or spells, while others are magical powerhouses but suck at close combat. To be honest though, I found that it's not really worth going down the magic route. Don't get me wrong, magic is super powerful and useful here, but it basically functions as a weapon pickup system, with every weapon sharing the same ammo. As a result, you'll run out of mana very quickly, and there aren't enough items to replenish it properly and use it on a consistent basis. Because of this, I recommend some of the in-between characters, which have decent combat and a decent mana pool. The levels in this game are very large, but pretty linear. I mean, you'll still flip switches and pick up keys, but it's unlikely you'll ever get lost. And that's because, like I said, this also has some Dynasty Warriors DNA built into it, even though it predates Dynasty Warriors by several years. So the idea is that you're supposed to go through the levels, mowing down enemies and looking for items to fill your inventory. And I don't know, call me crazy, but I love the look of this game. There were so many Doom and Duke Nukem clones during this period, but there's really nothing out there that mimics the aesthetic of 3D Hero. And you really gotta respect the ambition here. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is a lot of jank.
Foda-se, filho da puta, man.
Especially with these platforming segments. But this is such a cool game, and when you finish a level, you get sent to an overworld map where you pick your next stage. Here, you can also switch characters, and you can even lose on purpose to stock up on inventory items, which reset every time you go to a level. And the music is also pretty good. It ranges from high energy to ambient, and it really works. It also has a boss theme, which I can only describe as sad country music if Taiwan or China made sad country music. This is such a cool game. I just love everything about it. I mean, it even has an FMV intro. What other bootleg game has its own FMV intro? And sure, it looks pretty rough, but I mean, this came out in '97, and it doesn't look that far off from Duke Nukem 3D's FMVs, which only predate this game by a year. This game is super flawed, but man, it's just so cool. The ambition alone and just the sheer uniqueness of what they did with the Doom and Duke Nukem 3D engines is more than enough for me to recommend this one. Seriously, I love this game. If only there were some kind of sequel. Well, turns out there is, because this is Tao, made by the same studio and using the same cobbled together engine. Now, I don't know if this game came out before or after 3D Hero, but the FMV intro does look a little better here. In fact, the intro reminds me a lot of Diablo 1. And it's also really clear that the developers were super proud of their engine, because this is one of the first things you see when you boot up the game. Look at how proud they are of their engine, that's just so adorable. Anyway, as you can see, this is very similar to 3D Hero, but there are some pretty noticeable differences. The first is that you do not have any characters to choose from. Instead, you now get one character who's good at everything. And I feel this works far better than 3D Hero, because your melee is strong enough to defeat most enemies, but you also have enough magic and mana to back you up when you need it. Also, yes, I actually figured out the first person setting on this one early on. Now, one issue I have with running this game is that for the life of me, I could not get the music to run during gameplay. It worked fine in the main menu and when I paused the game. But as soon as I resumed playing, it was immediately cut off. So I think I need to replace it with the one song that makes sense. Much better. Anyway, unlike 3D Hero, which was like a cross between Doom and Dynasty Warriors, this is a full-blown 3D Realms first-person shooter. And by that I mean, the levels are much larger and intricate, with keys and switches playing a larger role. And enemies are much more varied, so you'll be fighting ghosts, yetis, zombies, skeleton mages, and more. Yeah, this game is going for a horror vibe, and it works really well. And in addition to the spells from the previous game, the inventory also makes a return. But this time, the game is far more generous with items, as you'll often come across vases which you need to destroy, which will drop items. And it's not uncommon to build a nice stockpile along the way. One interesting thing about Tao is that technically there aren't any levels. The game is actually just one giant interconnected maze, so you'll be walking in and out of different areas while the game pauses to load. Not only that, but any enemies you defeat and items you pick up will stay that way if you return later. And these areas are actually quite varied and interesting, with different multiple floors, as well as entrances and exits. The game honestly reminds me a lot of Killing Time for the 3D, which also had this open-world game design that helped it stand out from a sea of Doom clones. And as you explore these maps, you'll find switches and keys that open new areas, and these will cross into different zones. I mean, I don't want to call this a Metroidvania because you don't get any new skills, but it does border on a first-person Metroidvania. My only real issue with the game is that the map is so big that it's actually pretty easy to miss any keys, which then forces you to backtrack and look for more. But yeah, I enjoyed this game far more than 3D Hero, and I say it's absolutely worth checking out. We really don't give these games enough credit. This is Falchion for the Game Boy Color, a bootleg fighting game by the king of Game Boy Color bootlegs, Vast Fame. And this is their take on the Last Blade and Samurai Shodown series, with the game using a mix of characters from both series as well as a few other SNK favorites like Mai Shiranui, because of course she's here, she's gotta be everywhere. It's kinda funny how I've reviewed several fighting games by this studio before, and despite using the same engine and sharing many similarities, their controls always feel just different enough to keep them from being clones of each other. In this case, Soul Falchion has small sprites, and what you lose in graphical detail, you gain in control responsiveness, especially when compared to Queen Fighter 2000. But yes, this is a game with really good hit detection and speed, which are two things that most official developers for the Game Boy never could quite get the hang of. And you've also got special moves, super moves, and even counters. Not only that, but because this is using the King of Fighters engine, you can do one-on-one battles or even 3-on-3 battles, which is something the official versions of Last Blade and Samurai Shodown didn't do. Add to that some nice graphics, animations, and simple but appealing backgrounds, and you really have one of the better handheld fighting games for any 8-bit handheld. One thing I don't quite get is why they keep changing the names of the characters, and in this case, they used a lot of names taken straight from Mortal Kombat, like Saibot, Ermac, and Kang. But yeah, this game is excellent, and it really is quite funny how if you were to make a list of the best fighting games for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, most of it would be dominated by bootleg games created by Vast Fame. Seriously, this studio deserves so much more recognition. This is 777 Casino, an unlicensed casino-style game released for the Mega Drive in Taiwan. And you might be thinking, a casino game? Really? Who cares? But hold on there, cowboy, this isn't just any casino game. For starters, there's an actual plot here, which I sadly can't read. And then you pick between two anime characters to serve as your avatar. Once you do that, you're then sent to a town where you can talk to characters or visit different buildings. Because, yes, this is an RPG casino game. These buildings will have the various games, but they also set the minimum and maximum stakes you can bet. So you'll need to enter each building and spend money to buy betting tokens. Once that's done, you can play slot machines, blackjack, and Monopoly? Okay, I guess technically this is a variation on roulette. And it is kind of funny how it even uses the ring sound effect from Sonic the Hedgehog. And for every game, depending on how well you're doing or if you're struggling, you can activate special cards that let you earn twice as much, prevent you from losing this round, or see your opponent's deck. So, you know, cheating. And if you do well enough, you'll even unlock special images.
Hey, are you coming?
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny too, because even though this game was made in Taiwan, every image I unlocked featured Western women, so I assume these were taken from either Playboy or something to that effect. And I think this is probably a good time to remind you all that I have a Patreon and YouTube membership where you can check out all of my videos as I originally intended them.
Now this is more my style.
Another funny thing is that when you become a millionaire, you get this cutscene with your character being super happy, but then they're also holding a gun put up against their head. Why? Why are they doing this? And what the heck is going on with that face? Just what is going on here? I think I love this game. I should point out though that this game will crash on most emulators, but it ran flawless for me on Blastem, so I recommend using that one. This is a game that lives and dies by its presentation. But hey, if you're in the mood for a 16-bit anime casino RPG, then this is most likely your only choice. Unless, of course, the anime casino RPG is a booming genre that I was just never made aware of. This is Devil Island for the Game Boy Color, an action platformer developed in Taiwan, and this is kinda sorta a port of Konami's Getsu Fuuma Den, but not really. Some evil cultists have done evil cultist things, and they've broken a seal which released a dragon, and now the people are terrorized. And what the heck is that face? That's the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. Anyway, and it's now up to you to defeat the cultists and the dragon. And like I said, this game is kinda sorta a port of Konami's Getsu Fuuma Den for the Game Boy Color. So you have an overworld to explore where you'll run into the various levels, but also shops where you can buy items and upgrades or meet NPCs that give you advice. Items are then stored in your inventory, and some are used automatically, while others you'll have to pause the game and activate them. So you begin with a whip, and that's because sometimes this game was also passed off as a Castlevania bootleg. But the bootleg gaming community settled on the Devil Island name. Although, there's also a Lord of the Rings variant of this game, which got rid of the RPG mechanics and overworld elements, but whatever. Anyway, as you get new items, you'll find new weapons like a fireball, or potions that restore health. And like I said, some upgrades are used automatically, like this one that lets you break through walls to proceed through the level. Wait, does this count as a Metroidvania? Man, I swear, I'm starting to lose my grip on what counts as a Metroidvania or not. But whatever. And as you defeat enemies, they'll drop healing items, and you'll also very slowly gain experience, which makes you stronger. Now, as you might have noticed by now, this game uses a dark western fantasy aesthetic, whereas Getsu Fuuma Den was Japanese horror, and that's because this is sort of a half-port and half-original game. The game mechanics are the exact same near as I can tell, and so is the overworld. But the levels themselves are mostly original. I mean, some stages like this wall-breaking one was taken straight from the NES version, but most regular levels do seem to be original. And the backgrounds will really run the whole gambit, from Asian horror, dark European fantasy, and even tropical forests. The soundtrack is also completely original, and it's kind of all over the place. I mean, the songs are generally pretty decent, and most fit the aesthetic, but a few feel really out of place here. But regardless, this is a really fun game, and if you want a sorta kinda spin-off on the Konami classic, then this is the game for you. So I say, check it out, you might enjoy it more than you think. This is Huang, also known as the Yellow Emperor, and this is an unlicensed action platformer for the NES. The game begins with a short intro on how some dude or other is rebelling, and now it's your job to stop him. Though I guess that rebel army must have recruited demons, because that's the bulk of the enemies you'll be fighting. You can pick between two characters, but there's very little difference between them. Near as I can tell, they have some minor differences in speed and jumping, but that's about it. One thing you might notice though is that the graphics are actually pretty good for the NES, which is especially surprising considering that this is a bootleg game developed without access to any official tools. Even the music is actually pretty decent, which is where a lot of NES bootlegs tend to falter. Anyway, you can jump, use your sword, and shoot fireballs. And as you defeat enemies or break pots, you'll pick up health upgrades and power-ups, which give you a double shot and even a triple shot. But when you get hit, your attack power will be downgraded one level. Not only that, but you also have a special ability represented on the bottom left corner. And these can release energy waves, freeze enemies, or clear the screen. But the best special ability is by far the shield, which is the one you already start with. And as you defeat bosses, you'll unlock more special abilities, which you can then change by pushing the select button. But honestly, just stick with the shield, it's absolutely overpowered. Another cool thing is that when you defeat a boss, you even get a short cutscene. Honestly, for a bootleg game, there's some really good production values here. One weird thing about this game is that jumping and attacking can either trigger this spinning attack or trigger a special ability, and it basically depends on the angle of your jump. But this is a really awkward mechanic, and you'll end up wasting a lot of special abilities like I did. The game also has an interesting mechanic where your HP has no upper limit, meaning that if you collect enough hearts, you'll have more HP than the game actually shows you. One cool bit of trivia about this game is that when it originally launched, there was a bug that allowed you to continuously jump in the air, which basically made the whole game a cakewalk. But a kind modder took it upon themselves to fix this issue. And there's even a pretty cool article about it over at Time Extend. Add to that some pretty nice set pieces, good level design, and some pretty good graphics, and you honestly have a winner here. If you play this game without any context, there's a good chance you'd never notice that this is a bootleg. And that alone is reason enough to play this. Check it out if you can. This is Lady's Sword for the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16, and this is one of the rare examples of an unlicensed game that was only launched in Japan of all places. This is a first-person RPG in the style of the Wizardry games, although much simpler in its execution. At first, the game tells a fairly standard story of how monsters and demons are coming out of a cursed tower, and it's your job to stop them. And how this tower is hiding a powerful weapon called the Lady Sword, which you're obviously interested in. Once you actually start the game though, it begins as a fairly standard first-person dungeon crawler, though the game is kind enough to give you an auto map that you can bring up at any time. You're also the only character you control, as there are no other party members besides yourself, though you'll meet plenty of NPCs which fill you in on the story. And not gonna lie, at first I had little interest in them, but it began to grow as the story progressed. They only ever give you 1 or 2 lines whenever you meet them, but each time you do meet them, it compounds on what they've told you before, with each character having their own plotline. I especially like how each floor has the spirit of a maiden whose face has been scarred by being a prisoner there, as it ends up adding an almost horror-like element to the game. The combat is pretty simple and can make or break the game for you. You can basically attack, defend, run, or hit for a chance to take out your enemies in one hit, and that's basically it. You might think that this makes the game a cakewalk, but there's actually a few interesting elements to Lady's Sword. The first is that it's not about each individual battle, but rather it's about surviving the long haul, because there are no towns, inns, or shops. Everything you find, you'll have to do so by defeating enemies. Not only that, but there's no traditional leveling up system. Instead, some of your stats like your HP and attack will occasionally go up as you defeat enemies, but it's not guaranteed to do so. I don't know if it's random or if there's a threshold to it, but when you defeat bosses, all your stats go up. Once you do clear a boss and go up a floor, you get to rescue one of the living maidens, where you finally get to, see them in all their glory.
Nice. What else is coming?
And if you want to see them in all their glory, well, I have a Patreon and a YouTube membership. Sorry, gotta please the algo. You can rest at any time to regain health, but it also makes you vulnerable to being attacked by a particularly powerful demon. And as you go up the various floors, you'll soon start encountering traps like one-way passages, teleporters, and more. So the game becomes more of a question about survival, leveling up the right stats, and ensure that you don't get ambushed or lost. Thankfully, you do pick up helpful items as you progress, like a teleporter that lets you store a location in its memory in case you ever need to return there. Graphically, the game is just okay on a technical level, but I do like the art style, and the music is pretty good, which rounds up the whole package. This is a game that lives and dies by its mood, and it has that in spades. Personally, I really like the survival element and the plot as it slowly unfolds, and for that reason alone, I'm gonna give it my recommendation. So I say, check it out if you can. Well, that's the most amazing Goku I've ever seen. And this is Dragon Ball. No, not Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball. And this is a total conversion mod of Tecmo's Ninja Gaiden, which was only launched in South Korea. Except the graphics have now been replaced with characters from the original Dragon Ball. And honestly, between the fact that it's based on the original Dragon Ball instead of Dragon Ball Z and the Microsoft Paint style graphics, this is the better game as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so the level design has been ever so slightly altered, but the gameplay of the original game is still intact, with all the good and bad that comes with it. So you still have your basic combo and can jump over enemies to throw them onto the ground or obstacles, which then break to reveal power-ups and health pickups. But the hit detection is less than stellar, which to be fair, that's an issue that stemmed from the original game. And just like the original Ninja Gaiden, Dragon Ball just loves to overwhelm you with way too many enemies. I kinda wish they had addressed both of these issues when working on this version. But this is offset by the game's theme and how it references some pretty deep cuts into the Dragon Ball lore, like a billboard promoting Roshi's Pafu. Okay, let me try that one again. Like a billboard promoting Roshi's Pafu Pafu or Monster Carrot, which honestly, I'm just glad that someone remembered he exists. That dude was a really fun villain. It's also funny how you have Chun-Li's voice samples for Goku, while a few of the songs and sound effects were taken from Golden Axe. So yeah, your enjoyment of this game will really depend on how much you're into the original Dragon Ball, and how much of Ninja Gaiden's bullshit you're okay with. Personally though, whenever I'm in the mood for the original Ninja Gaiden, I just play this one instead. And if you're a Dragon Ball fan, you should too. Linus Spacehead's Cosmic Crusader, also known as Cosmic Spacehead, is a game that mixes two different genres into one. It's part point-and-click adventure and part platformer. And the game was developed by Codemasters and published for the NES without Nintendo's permission. You play as Linus, and you're an alien trying to prove you discovered planet Earth. So you'll be picking up items and talking to characters who give you hints on how to progress. And as you travel between areas, you'll need to platform your way to the next part of the world. The problem is that Linus has no means of self-defense and his jumps are pretty short, which makes the game rather difficult. This might sound like a flaw, but as we'll soon see, it's really not. More on that later. Once you get to a new area, you can travel between world locations without having to redo the platform segments, which saves a lot of time, as the game will just skip to wherever you need to go, which in turn means that it's pretty clear that the focus of the game is on the point-and-click portions and not so much on the platforming segments. And I gotta say, I love the art style and attention to detail. Like, Linus has a lot of different idle animations, and you can really get a sense of his personality from them. And the game is making a smart use of colors, giving you some interesting visuals and making each area feel unique. And the soundtrack is excellent. Like I said before, if there's one place where Codemasters do not miss, it's the music. Except for Firehawk for some reason. The game's puzzles are fairly easy, making it a good entry point to newcomers to the genre, and the puzzles are equally cute. Like, for example, if you try to buy a ticket to the bumper cars, but don't have enough money, the attendant will give you a free balloon. And when you meet this monster, you can just give him the balloon, which will make him float up. and the next time you travel to a new area, you can see the monster floating up in the world map, and he's just gonna stay there the entire game. Like, the attention to detail is just really nice here. And there's a lot of humor and puns, like how Linus will tell you that this is a family game if you try to use the pickup action on a human being, or how you can get cake icing to freeze a lake and walk over it. And we even got a cool minigame with the aforementioned bumper cars. This game is an odd hybrid, but surprisingly, the mix of different genres really works. So yeah, if you're in the mood for a simple point-and-click game with some really hard but fun platforming, then Linus is for you. Linus would also come to the Sega Master System under the name Cosmic Spacehead, although this time it was published with Sega's consent, and this is pretty much the same game. But you now have a two-player bumper car game that is selectable from the main menu if you want to play with a friend. And despite the Master System version having more colors than the NES, I feel the color choices here aren't quite as interesting, as the world often feels a bit more washed out by comparison. And the music, while still good, isn't quite up to par to its Nintendo counterpart. But the real flaw here is in the platforming. Now, Linus jumps way too high and the controls feel way too slow and floaty for me. It just makes the platforming sections really boring. Because of this, I'm gonna say the NES version is better. But if you want the definitive version of Cosmic Spacehead, then you want the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive version. Not only does it have the bumper car minigame right out of the box like the Master System version, but look at this! The bumping graphics and art style is immense! I almost want to say this game's art style was inspired by Day of the Tentacle. But it turns out that this actually predates the LucasArts classic by a full year. Oh, and the music is a lot better too. Although I will say, I still prefer the platforming from the NES version. The Mega Drive version improved on the Master System, but it's still a little too slow and easy for my taste. I was actually surprised to learn that the Mega Drive version isn't a bootleg, especially considering the uncommon shape of the cartridge.
Seriously though, why does it look like that?
And this is a rare example of a game that began its life as a bootleg, only to then be upgraded to officially licensed. For my money, the Mega Drive version is the way to go here. But if you want more exciting platforming or see the game's unlicensed origins, check out the NES version instead. This is Taiwan Da Hang, an unlicensed board game launched for the Mega Drive in Taiwan. And this is basically Monopoly taken to its extreme. So now, you play as a bunch of tycoons, roll the dice, and go around an extremely large map buying properties and upgrading them. The cool thing here is that you can actually choose to go in any direction you want, with the various routes crossing and crisscrossing each other as you purchase new locations, upgrade them, and invest into them. And as the game progresses, you get Krillin from Dragon Ball here, who is now a news anchor, reporting on the status of each player. In fact, the game is basically staged like a sort of road trip between tycoons, with the news media always following and reporting on each player. Sadly though, as you can likely tell, this game hasn't been translated yet, and that's a shame, because the Mega Drive doesn't have that many board games, and the ones it does have tend to be just straight conversions of the actual game instead of going the video game route and going all out. As of right now, I can't really recommend this game unless you speak Chinese, but hopefully someone will one day translate this one. This is World of Warcraft Demon Hunter for the NES. Yes, really! And this is the JRPG launch for the NES in... well, I don't actually know when this launched, but the PC game launched in 2004, so we can assume that this version didn't launch until at least 2005. Man, that is insane! That's the same year the Xbox 360 launched. Anyway, in this game, you play as Illidan Stormrage, and full disclosure, I never really followed the Warcraft plotline past Warcraft 3, so there might be some context in his story that I might be missing. Anyway, you play as Illidan when he was still a night elf, and the story follows the path he took towards becoming a demon and a demon hunter. So the story begins with Illidan getting along well with his brother Malfurion and Terandi, and how he was led astray by Queen Ashara before she became herself a Naga. And as far as I remember, this is all fairly accurate to the game, right down to the part where she wanted to use the Well of Eternity to cleanse the world, which in turn caught the attention of the Burning Legion. And honestly, the fact that I'm playing World of Warcraft on the NES is just incredible! They took an MMO and an RTS strategy game and managed to fit it all into a single NES cartridge. It's also funny how your world sprite is that of Cecil from Final Fantasy IV and how the Moon Temple uses the Chocobo theme of all things. That was certainly a choice. Heck, even the battle theme was basically taken from Final Fantasy IV. Man, I just love the weird mishmash of game franchises in this. Anyway, combat is a turn-based affair like you would expect from any JRPG, but there are a few interesting gameplay mechanics that do set it apart. There are no weapons or armor to buy or equip. Rather, you can only buy items that replenish health, mana, and the like. But the combat, though, is actually super interesting. Basically, you start every battle with 0 mana, and as you're hit, your mana meter goes up, and you can fill it up to 3 times. And the more it fills, the more powerful spells you can cast. So it's basically like creating a combat system around the concept of a limit break. Except, instead of doing a limit break, it simply unlocks all your skills. And once you finish a battle, you and your party are fully healed. It took me a while, but eventually, once I got a full party, I realized why they went with this unique battle system. Basically, the game is trying to emulate World of Warcraft's combat. You being hit and gaining mana is meant to emulate the downtime after using a skill, and you healing up automatically is simply the developers trying to implement the passive health and mana regeneration that you get in World of Warcraft. But I gotta say, I feel the two major issues with this game are the music, which isn't great, and the fact that Illidan spends way too much time alone. I mean, you'll play alone, then get a full party, which by the way is when the game really finds itself, but then you're alone again, and it takes a while before you build your party back up. Because once you have a full party, combat becomes really interesting, as you're constantly managing your MP levels and whether or not your characters can take the hit to unlock the next level of their spells. I was originally going to cover Diablo 2 over World of Warcraft, because yes, Diablo 2 also got the bootleg NES JRPG treatment, but sadly, that game suffers from some pretty broken level scaling from your foes. But thankfully, they didn't do that for World of Warcraft. And honestly, yeah, if you're into World of Warcraft, you need to check this one out. Even if it's just for the sheer curiosity of it. This is Fire Emblem Gaiden for the Game Boy Color, and as you can likely imagine by the name, it's a bootleg port of Fire Emblem Gaiden on the NES, and it was done by the same studio who did Final Fantasy VII, World of Warcraft, and Diablo 2. And well, there's not much to say here really. This is a straight port of the game with very few changes. The character portraits are gone and the music was changed, but that's about it really. For those who don't know, Fire Emblem Gaiden is a game that mixes the Fire Emblem combat formula with a more traditional RPG by adding towns and NPCs. Basically, it's a sort of predecessor to Shining Force. So you'll be talking to characters, recruiting them to your party, and taking them to battle. Here, distance and positioning matters, as do the weapons you're using and whether you're on flat ground or locations like forests and mountains. And after each attack animation, your characters gain experience and level up. I gotta say though, it's kinda funny how you hear the Zelda item pickup jingle whenever you complete a turn. And once a battle is finished, you then move on to an overworld where you can follow along the main plot or go on alternate routes to get more characters. And, yeah, that's pretty much it really. The game itself is fun, though the NES version is still the way to go here. But for the longest time, this was the only way of getting your Fire Emblem fix on the go. And even though it has outlived its usefulness, I think it's worth remembering for that reason alone. And there we go, a look at several good bootleg games you most likely never played. Are there any games I missed? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'd like to thank all my Patreon supporters and YouTube membership backers. Thank you for helping make the channel better. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!